How's everybody doing today? Good. All right, if you're keeping track of the schedule, it has changed somewhat. My name is Jay, and I have been bumped up to talk to you guys this hour because Doug is doing a television interview and couldn't be up here right now. So, was anybody here for my presentation in the big room earlier? No. Okay, all right, well, good. Let's start off from the beginning then. And the Declaration of Independence starts, and it talks about to define what it means to be a human being in the United States. It says that we are born with certain inalienable rights, right? These rights are given to us by our Creator. And those rights include life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, a lot of what has happened in the United States ever since 1776, and those words were penned, has been the United States wrestling with that concept, that idea that we are all of us born with inalienable rights. We are created equal in the eyes of God. That there is something about us as people that makes us valuable. Now, at the signing of the Declaration of Independence, did our country live up to that standard? Did it treat everybody as if they were all created equal in the eyes of God? No. Who wasn't treated that way? Okay, women, African American, yes, slaves. There were groups within our country, and by the way, people who were moving and immigrating to our country who were not from the same region as the original people that were immigrating to our country. And so we see that standard that's set, right? All men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. And among those rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then we see how we are acting or working in our culture and in our country, and we try to make sense of what's going on there. And throughout those years, throughout all of that time in the United States, we have fought against any time we look back at our principles and see that those principles are currently being violated. Now, I was talking to a young man earlier today, and he was telling me, I have a hard time being a patriot. He said, I have a hard time feeling patriotic. I said, why do you have a hard time feeling patriotic? He said, well, as a Christian, I recognize that our country does terrible evil. And I said, you know what? I recognize that as well, and I struggled with the same thing. But do you know what cured me of that problem? I read a book by Frederick Douglass. Does anybody know who Frederick Douglass is? Okay, Frederick Douglass was a man who was born into slavery. He learned to read, which was against the law for him. It was a violation of the rules of his plantation and his master for him to learn to read. But he secretly stole away and learned to read from Christians. And he read the Bible, and he read the Constitution of the United States, and he decided there is no way that God intended me to be a slave. There's no way that this is what he wants from me, not the God that I'm reading about there. And it's just flat out not what America is supposed to be. And so he left slavery, went to the North as a free man, and then started speaking out as an abolitionist against slavery. Now, he was so eloquent, so powerful a speaker, so great at what he did, that they refused to believe that he was born a slave. And so he wrote a book called My Bondage, My Freedom. And in that book he says, and through his history, you read about him, he'll tell you, I love the United States, I love the Constitution, I love the Declaration of Independence. I love this country because of the ideas that formed it. I love the idea that we are all created equal, even if we're not behaving that way, even if we're not acting that way. When we get to the abortion debate is one of the ugliest conversations we've ever had in the history of the United States. In 1973, on January 22nd, the Supreme Court passed a decision which is called Roe v. Wade. Have you all heard of Roe v. Wade, I assume? Okay, Roe v. Wade was done by the Supreme Court because they believed that the tide of history was moving towards the liberalization of abortion laws. And they said, you know what we can do right here, right now? We can put an end to the debate. If we make it legal, it has to be legal, a national right for there to be, for people to get abortions. Then we end the debate and nobody has to argue anymore, and we can just move on as a society. We can just move on to this new world that we live in where everybody just accepts that this is the new norm. Now, did that happen? No. Because people saw that it violated the principles of the founding of our country if the unborn are human in the same way that we are. If all men are created equal, and the unborn are human in the same way that we are, then that document applies to them the same way we discovered that it applied to slaves, the same way that we discovered that it applied to women, the same way that we discovered how it applied and would reach out into the civil rights movement. Over and over again, our country has had to fight with itself between what it is doing to a group of people at any given moment and what the ideas and principles that our country were founded on call us to be at our best. What Abraham Lincoln called the better angels of our nature. We are called by our Christian faith to be the best that we can be. But we are called there to reach a different paradigm. Who is the paradigm that we're supposed to be modeling ourselves after? Does anybody know? Jesus. Yeah, that's a perfect Sunday school answer, man. This doesn't get any easier than that. It's Jesus. Just say it. Call it out. That's easy. Jesus. We're supposed to be like Jesus. He is the paradigm of who we are supposed to be as a person as an individual, his life, his love, his character, and the way that he acted. And as Christians, we know that there are ways we ought not to treat other people. A lot of Christians believe that the unborn fall into a class of human beings that are like us. They have to be treated a certain way. But they struggle with going out into our culture and saying, and there's a reason why they struggle. Is our culture friendly to people when they go out and express contrary opinions? No. You're going to get two types of greetings. You're going to get an outright nasty greeting if you go out and say, as a Christian, I believe that the unborn are fully human and they ought to be protected. Or you're going to get a subtly bad response. The nasty response is very easy to see. Do y'all know who Nick Cannon is? Okay, you remember the song that Nick Cannon had where he talked about his mom not aborting him, where he thanked her for making the right decision instead of the knife incision. He talked about this idea that he was not aborted, and he thanked his mother, and he categorized not aborting him as what? Right. Well, you just heard Brett giving a demonstration of the idea of objective value and the idea of an objective truth. And when Nick Cannon said it was right not to abort me, he was applying an objective truth claim that to abort him would have been then wrong. And that's an objective value statement. Now, how do you think the culture at large, especially the culture who is in favor of a woman's right to get an abortion, responded to Nick Cannon? He was viciously attacked. How dare you say what's right for other people? Who are you to force your beliefs on somebody else? Nick Cannon had no right to say that it was wrong to abort him. And that's just one instance. I talked about earlier, last year at this time, an organization called Susan G. Komen. Are y'all familiar with them? Okay, the breast cancer research, and they give donations to groups for mammograms and for breast cancer research. Susan G. Komen is one of the greatest organizations as far as raising money that this world has ever seen. And they do a great job because everybody feels really good about what Susan G. Komen's doing, right? It's not really an ideological bent to this. You hate breast cancer. That's not going to cause you to take a big risky stake there. But they also give grants to Planned Parenthood. Now, Planned Parenthood just happens to be the #1 abortion provider in the United States. So a lot of pro-life Christians and a lot of pro-life individuals have struggled with Susan G. Komen. And so last year at this time, Susan G. Komen said, you know what we're going to do? We're just going to stop giving those grants to Planned Parenthood. And that way everybody can feel good about supporting us. You know what happened? Susan G. Komen was attacked from the moment that they went public with that position. People that for years have talked about what a great organization they were started coming out and saying they're nothing but a front to make money. All they do is rip everybody off. They are nothing but a bunch of frauds. They attacked them over and over and over again. Even though Susan G. Komen is about 8 times smaller than Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood is a $1 billion organization. Susan G. Komen is much smaller. But the message was, you can't stop giving money to Planned Parenthood. Why? Because to stop giving money to Planned Parenthood because Planned Parenthood performs abortions would be a moral judgment on abortion. And you're not allowed to do that. I was at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and they called me in to speak to the pro-life group and to train them to be able to do what we're going to start to talk about in a second here. Going out into the world and arguing your pro-life beliefs, but doing it in a way that will actually change and impact the people you're talking to, as opposed to what normally happens. When that pressure, that nastiness comes from the other side, more often than not, how do we respond back at them? Nasty! Yeah, you evil baby-killing monsters. Who are you people? You know, how could you not have any kind of conscience? You are moral, whatever. I mean, we respond with that same kind of nastiness. And so my job is to go around and talk to people to try to help them to learn how to share their deepest moral convictions in a way that's not going to offend the person they're talking to and will hopefully convince them of the truth of their position. And so I trained this group, these students in North Carolina, and they say, you know what would be great? What would be great is if tomorrow we were able to set you up in the student center, or right at the student center. It's an area called the Pit at UNC. And at the Pit, all the students are walking around, and they just said, we're going to set up a table there, and we're going to friendly invite people to come and dialogue with you. Are you okay with that? I said, well, sure. That'll give us a great chance to see you in action doing the things that you taught us. I said, well, you know what? As long as it's not controversial, as long as we're not like, come on, get them, and that kind of, I'll be happy to talk to people in a respectful way. And they said, great. So the next morning they go to set the table out, and they come up to me and they said, there's been a problem. Say, what's the problem? They said, well, apparently today is First Amendment Day on the campus. And apparently in honor of First Amendment Day, they're not allowing you to have a table because they said you can't sit up and talk there. If you're familiar with the First Amendment, it is the freedom of speech. So it was a strange thing for them to say, in honor of the First Amendment, you're not allowed to have a table there. But I'm not going to argue with that because they said, well, we got a way around it. They said, you can stand there and you can talk to people. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a sign to tell them that you're there to talk. I said, all right. So they go, I see somebody over there with a marker picking up a sign. This thing holds it over my head. I'm standing in the middle of the pit of the student area, and it says, come take on the pro-lifer. It's like, oh, this is not what you guys told me we were going to have. Now, for months before going to Chapel Hill, all I've heard about is this place is liberal, man. I mean, people have been calling me up, and they're saying, dude, it is so liberal. Get ready. They're coming after you. It's the most liberal campus. So now I'm in the middle of the student area, the most liberal campus apparently on earth, according to all these people that have been calling me, with the sign saying, come get them. Come take them on. And they did. Yeah, it was, get them. People yelling at me about bombing clinics, you baby, you know, whatever. But the group that came around me and started talking, they were very hostile at first, very angry, pointing, yelling, and throwing accusations. Within 2 minutes, we were talking. And all of the yelling and screaming had stopped. For 4 hours, I sat out there and talked to college students, surrounded by these people. And we shared dialogue that was so productive that by the time it was over, there was a young lady that was waiting for me. And she walked up to me and she said, I'm one of the leaders of the pro-choice group here on campus. I am so glad you came. I'm so happy we were able to talk about this on the campus today like this. And then I made her give me a big hug. And I said, because I'm a hugger, and I like that. And let me tell you something, this is the way we should talk to each other. It doesn't mean that we don't have profound differences in what we believe, and that those differences don't have great impact, but we shouldn't have to scream at each other to do it. The more subtle way that you're going to hear it, other than the nasty thing, is you're going to have somebody say something to you like this. You don't want an abortion? Don't have one. You don't like abortion? Don't do it. I went to a church, and there was this guy working in the garden when I pulled up, and I said, hey, how's it going? And the guy said, great. I said, where's your pastor? I'm here to talk to him. He said, he's right over there. What are you here to talk to him about? I said, I'm just inviting him to this event. I work for a pro-life organization. He said, oh, pro-life. Do you want to know which is what everybody asks when they find out what I do. I said, go ahead. Tell me what you think. And he said, I think that abortion is wrong personally. I personally think it's wrong, but I think that it ought to be legal. Well, why do you personally think it's wrong? I said, well, I think that it's killing an innocent life. I mean, I personally think I would go so far as to say I personally believe it's murder, but it needs to be legal, because who am I to force my religious position on somebody else? Just like Joe Biden was saying on that video a second ago. Those are my religious convictions. They shouldn't apply to somebody else. Now, there's two ways to respond when somebody would say something like that. You can get angry and start getting mad at him and pointing out how silly he is, or you can take a better tactical approach. So, do you mind if I ask you a question? So, yeah, sure, what's the question? So, you said you think that abortion is wrong because it kills people, right? And he said, yeah. I said, okay, well, do you mind if I repeat back to you what you just said? And he said, okay, go ahead. And I said, you think that abortion is wrong because it kills innocent human life. You have just said that you think abortion is wrong because it is, by your words, murder. But you think that it ought to be legal to kill innocent human beings. You think it ought to be legal to murder. And he just sat there for a second, thought about it, and said, man, that doesn't sound right, does it? It's like, no, it doesn't. You see, what is going on right now is this culture is starting to confuse, as he was talking about, as Brett was talking about earlier, preference statements with objective claim statements. And in abortion, they're categorizing that as a preference statement. When they hear me say, I think abortion's wrong, what they're hearing me say is, I don't like abortion, but that's not what I'm saying. Let me give you an example here of what we're talking about, what Brett was talking about. I love bacon. Oh, I think bacon is like God's most perfect food. There's almost nothing that is not immediately better when you put bacon into it. And I got done speaking one time, and this woman walked up to me, and she's like, I just heard you speak here. And she gave me a bacon chocolate bar, and it was like this Nestle's Crunch bar from heaven. It was just awesome with bacon in every bite. My 8-year-old daughter hates it. Hates bacon. She looks exactly like me. If she didn't, I would doubt she was actually my daughter. And this drives me crazy. And I tell her, Mary Jackson, you're wrong. Bacon is awesome, and you are just absolutely wrong on this. And she's like, Dad, let me tell you how this works. You put bacon into your mouth, and you like it. I put it into my mouth, and I don't. I'm not wrong. It's true that I don't like bacon. See, my 8-year-old daughter understands the difference between subjective truth and objective truth. I'm trying to force my opinion on her in this place and tell her, you're wrong, bacon's awesome, and there's something wrong with you if you don't understand that fact. And she responds with, no, you're wrong. It's my preference. I don't like it. And so when she tells me she doesn't like it, she's telling me something true. When I tell her I like it, I'm telling her something true. But that's what they hear when they hear us say we don't like abortion. They hear us saying, I don't like it. But that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is it objectively is wrong. It's a true statement. And if it's true, then it's true for all people at all times. Now, why would it be true? Well, Greg Koukl, if it's true that it's wrong, it's only true that it's wrong for one reason. And Greg Koukl is here. He does a great illustration for this. It's called, Daddy, Can I Kill This? He says that imagine yourself at a sink and you're washing your hands, and all of a sudden one of my children walks up behind me, and I don't look around to see it, but Mary Jackson, the same one who hates bacon, my 8-year-old daughter, is standing behind me, and she says, hey, Daddy, can I kill this? Okay, what do I need to find out before I can answer the question?
What she's going to kill?
Yeah, what is it she's got? What does she want to kill? What is it that she's seeking to end the life of right there? If it is an insect, then I'm probably thrilled to death that there's finally another bug killer in the house. We have a lack of them right now. I'm the only one that'll do it. If it's the neighbor's cat that keeps wandering over into our bushes, as much as I might want to endorse her to do so, I'm going to say no because we got to get along with these people to some degree. If it's my 4-year-old daughter, absolutely not. Back away, let her go, move on down the line. So the central question to this is, can I kill this? What is it? And when you're talking about abortion, that's what we focus our conversation on. Too often we want to talk about all these other things, but we're going to focus in on a laser, like a laser, on this one issue. What is it that you want to kill? What is it that you want to destroy? What is it that you want to end the life of? If it is a human being in the same way that you and I are, then we have moral obligations to them, right? If it's not, then it's no different than a tooth extraction. So we don't have to argue a lot of other things. It doesn't have to be morally complex. It's actually a very morally simple issue. What are the unborn? And we ask that question when we get into a conversation with somebody. We focus in on that because the fact of the matter is almost everybody has already decided what the unborn are and that they are not human beings prior to reasoning to this. It's called a presupposition. To presuppose something is prior to reasoning, prior to thinking about it, you presuppose something about that that's going to corrupt your whole way of thinking. If you decide that the unborn are not human in the same way that you and I are, before you think about abortion, how do you think that that's going to affect how you think about all these issues? You're going to get all sorts of strange arguments. Like somebody will say to me, like this pastor said to me one time, I was talking to him, he said, Jay, what are we going to do with all these poor children if we get rid of abortion? If we make abortion illegal, what do we do with all these poor children? How do we deal with all of these poor children? Now, what is he saying?
That abortion should be legal.
I'm sorry, somebody over here, you're right, but abortion should be legal, but why?
The children that are aborted are poor.
Yeah, because if we don't abort these children, they're going to become born poor children, and we're going to have to take care of them. So a solution to poverty is what?
Killing everyone?
Killing them before they're born. Now, as a pastor, I find this an odd thing coming from him. I would think that he would have a different view of human life, but that's what he offered. Now, I could say, are you serious? You're a pastor and you think killing people is the way we're going to deal with poverty? But I don't say that. I hide that inside, deep inside. And I say to him, I say to myself, we got a guy who's presupposing it. And we're going to show a trick how we do that, a tool that we use. It's called Trot Out the Toddler. And I put my hand up to my hip and I say, Pastor, I've got a 2-year-old child standing next to me right here. This 2-year-old child is the 5th of 5 children. Her birth into this family has caused the family resources to be stretched to such a point that they are now a 2-income family. There is no doubt that all of the children in this family are getting less parental attention because this child is here. There's no doubt that everybody in the family has less as a result of the birth of this child. Would it be okay to kill this child to make life financially easier on this family? What do you think the pastor says? No. What do you think any normal human being says when you ask them that question?
Nothing.
No. No, they say no, right? I hope you would too, by the way. If somebody asks you if we can kill 2-year-olds to relieve the financial burden of their family. The answer, by the way, is no. We can't do that. This is an easy test. That was even easier than the Jesus answer earlier. So, no, we cannot. You say no, and then I ask another question. Why not? When his answer is, because they're human beings. Because it's a human being. You can't kill a human being for that reason. So, so if the unborn are human in the same way that this 2-year-old is, we wouldn't kill them for reasons of finances either. So the question is not finances. The question is, what are the unborn? You see, the person has already acknowledged financial burden is not a reason to kill human beings. So he's seeing the idea for the first time. He just already assumed that the unborn aren't human beings in the same way that we are. That Trot Out the Toddler is a way to help them to see the mistake that they're making. And we use that because we want people to understand. They agree with us on very important issues. They agree that it's wrong to kill people. And that we don't kill people except for a very, very narrow set of reasons. And that the reasons that they're giving that are necessary for abortion, some of them would be more frivolous because I want to go to school where I want, and if I have this child, it's going to interfere with me being able to school. My career path will be changed by having this child. Some of them are not so frivolous. I was raped. But if we have some common place of understanding where we can start, we don't kill human beings for a set of reasons, then we can understand that the question is, what are the unborn? Not the circumstances that they brought up. Now, I brought up rape. Anybody familiar with the election cycle that we just went through? You ever heard of a guy, Aiken and Murdoch, these two, they were both Republicans that were winning Senate races, and they were asked one question about abortion. They were asked a question about their position about abortion in the case of outlawing abortion in the case of women being raped. Both of them answered poorly. One of them answered much more poorly than the other. But in both cases, they lost their election based on that one answer to a question. That's how important this issue is in our culture. They weren't capable of answering one question as related to abortion, and they lost an election they were winning prior to that question being asked. And everywhere I go when I do Trot Out the Toddler, and I say, does anybody have any example that they want me to take on? Do you know what they all say? Rape. I said, let's see rape. I'm like, okay. When I was in front of students on a campus, particularly North Carolina, when I had a crowd full of people, this angry young man starts pointing at me and screaming at me. He says, how dare you? Who do you think you are? How can you think it's fair to force a woman to have the baby that was conceived in rape? Who do you think you are? Now, this is important because when people talk about rape, there's two things that you've got to do. If you want to defend the pro-life position, you've got to recognize, number one, the question is, what are the unborn? But number two, there are other grave moral evils in this world, and that to ignore them for the one is a mistake that will cost you in trying to convince people of something. Rape is a grave moral evil. And so when that man is screaming and yelling at me, I said, hold on one second there. Nothing that happens to that woman is fair after she's been raped. And I never said anything different. If a woman gets raped, fair is out the window. Evil has occurred. And the man who raped her ought to be punished to the fullest extent of the law. Rape is a grave moral evil. And our community needs to rally around her and give her the support that she needs to get over this. Not just the immediate support, but long-term support, recognizing that this woman will never be the same. But let me ask you a question. I have a 2-year-old child standing next to me. Every single day of his life, this 2-year-old child reminds his mother of a past experience in her life that is profoundly painful. Every day, at some point, she experiences profound and genuine, real depression as she looks at that boy and remembers that event. Would it be okay to kill him to relieve her of that reminder? And even those people standing there, even those people that were listening, they all said, no. Okay then. If the unborn are human in the same way the toddler is, then we don't kill them for that reason either. We find a more humane response. We don't act like it's not a problem or an either or. We move forward and do what we can to reach out to women who have been raped, but we stop pretending that we can fix it by doing another evil thing on top of it. Now, it doesn't mean that they liked what I said, but that was a different response than saying, well, when women are legitimately raped, they don't get pregnant. That's a terrible response. He deserved to lose for that. Anybody who is so insensitive to not recognize it, and a friend of mine, Steve Wagner, he says that you got to understand that the rape question isn't to determine whether or not the unborn are human, it's to determine whether you are. Okay, we do the Trot Out the Toddler. And we show them that they are presupposing that the unborn are not human. But now we've got to move on, because so far we haven't made a case for life. We haven't done anything to support our view of abortion. All we've done is try to demonstrate to them that they're making certain mistakes. And don't miss the strength of being able to demonstrate to somebody that there's mistakes in their reasoning. Mistakes in their reasoning corrupt everything that they conclude from the process of thinking these things through. It corrupts it so they get wrong conclusions from what they're processing. So when you can point those things out, as I did earlier this week with an atheist that I was talking to, and I was able to point to a fallacy that he was committing, and then he committed it again later, and I said, no, every time you do it, it's a mistake, not just that time. You can't ever do it. It has to be weeded out. It has to be weeded out of your thinking process. They have to be willing to defend the position that the unborn are not human. They can't just assert it. They can't just say it. So now we're going to move on to making our case, and we're going to use science and philosophy to make our case. We're going to appeal to science to determine what the unborn are, and philosophy to determine whether or not they have value. Now, why am I not quoting chapter 1 of Jeremiah? Why am I not going to Psalm 139? Why don't I go to Luke chapter 1 and say, remember when Elizabeth came in with Mary, and John the Baptist in the womb wept, and that demonstrates that we're talking about a human being. Why don't I appeal to the Bible to try to convince them?
Because they don't believe in it.
Yeah. Over and more in this culture, people don't accept the Bible. Go to an atheist and sit down with him. And I used to be an atheist, by the way. I used to be a rabidly pro-choice atheist. And if you came up to me as a Christian and said, hold on a second, and flipped to a Bible scripture and said, this is why what you're doing is wrong, and I'd be like, hey, let me go get a John Grisham novel, and I'll flip to that, and this is why it's okay. That's how much respect I have for the book that you're showing me right now. I think it's a fiction. It's fiction. It's a work of fiction. It's made up. I don't quote Thor to you. Don't quote Jesus back to me. But when we're talking about abortion, we're not trying to win them over to Christianity necessarily. We're trying to convince them that there's a Christian ethic that is true for them and true for all people. And so we have 5 minutes, let's say, with that person in front of us. So we have to make an impact. We have to find the places they agree with us. And they believe that science and philosophy work. And if Christianity is true, does science in any way contradict Christianity? That's the question. If Christianity is true, can science contradict Christianity? Not real science, it can't. Because if it's true, it's scientifically true. If it's true, it's philosophically true. If it's true, it's existentially true. If it's the truth of the universe, it's just flat true. And so we don't have to be afraid to go to science and to use science. We don't have to be afraid to use philosophy. Because they're not going to hear us if we quote the Bible. And so let's use science. Look at science tells us. The science of embryology tells us that from the moment they come into existence, the unborn are distinct, living, and whole human beings. From the very moment of conception, they're distinct, living, and whole human beings. Now, I've heard guys on the streets or when I'm talking to people, I remember in a break room at one place I used to work, this guy would say, man, we don't know what they are. And since nobody knows what they are, we can't pass laws about that. Like, dude, everybody knows what they are. There's an embryology textbook in the world that doesn't know that. You want me to demonstrate how easy it for you is? I could quote like 3 or 4 different embryology textbooks. Let me tell you a quick story. About a week ago, we're sitting around the dinner table, my family, and my 10-year-old son, out of nowhere, all of a sudden looks over at my wife and says, hey, Mom, did you know that inside the woman there is a single cell called an egg? And when that egg meets the sperm from a man, a new human being is made. My wife's jaw just drops open. Her eyes are like wide. And I'm thinking, I cannot believe he's saying this in front of his 8-year-old sister and his 4-year-old sister. And my wife says, yeah, I did know that. How do you know that? And he said, well, I found this anatomy book on the shelf, and I pulled it out, and I was reading it. And it said all that. And I was like, oh, great. Now, he did comfort us by saying, guys, don't worry. It only happens once a month. And we're like, all right. Thanks. Thanks for that, Peyton. But that's a demonstration how available this information is to you. My 10-year-old son found an anatomy book, not a Christian book, not a pro-life book, just a regular anatomy book, pulled it off the shelf, was flipping through, and discovered all sorts of interesting facts that he wanted to share over the dinner table. To which my wife said, your dad will be talking to you about a lot of things very soon. I was like, ah, great. Put that on the schedule, Peyton. We're going to get to that.
Who's your son?
Yeah. The unborn are distinct, living, and whole human beings. They're distinct because they are different from every cell in the body of their mother or their father. From the very moment they come into existence, even when they're one cell, they're absolutely different than any cell that's contained in either the father or the mother. They're a distinct life. They're not part of anybody else. The constituent parts of the mom and the dad, as my son so graphically described at the table, come together to bring forth a new life. They are whole, which means that they are not parts. I have an arm here just full of what's called somatic cells. Your arm has genetic markers in it that are your full genetic code. Every cell in your body has got your DNA on it. If we start to pull, arm cells off or skin cells off and drop them to the floor, hopefully nobody in the room is freaking out about the loss of life. Like, no, hundreds of cells are dying. How could you do that? They're all got a full genetic... No, but because they're parts. They're part of me. They're not the whole of me. This single-celled organism, when it first comes into existence, is a whole. It is not a part of anything else. It has its own genetic code, its own developmental path. It is working its way towards expression of what it already is. From the moment you came into existence as a zygote, everything about you that is physically or genetically determined was already there. Your eyes are brown. Your hair is blonde. As me, in your mid-30s, you tend to start to bald. All of that stuff was available there as far as information. It was only expressed during my development. So from the very moment that you come into existence and you're alive, which means that you have three different things here. You metabolize, you react to stimuli, and you reproduce, or your cells reproduce, which means you grow. If you poke something, they move. Even at a small cellular level, if you poke it, it will react to that stimuli. And you are processing food. That's all present from the very moment that you come into existence. That's not something that comes later. And your parents are human, which should clear up a lot of confusion for people. You'd be surprised how many smart people struggle with this concept. They'll start to ask us, oh, I don't understand. How do we determine what the genetic ratio, how much does it have to be 100% close to a human being as far as if we break down genetic? I'm really struggling with this. And our response is usually, well, one easy way to tell is when they have human parents, they're usually human beings. And that's not real difficult to do. I mean, we have a lot more sophisticated arguments, but that should be enough for most people. It came out of a human being. It most likely is a human life, if it was the product of human reproduction. This is not a point that anybody's struggling on. People aren't sitting around trying to figure out what they are. The Supreme Court struggled with it a little bit, but not scientists, not doctors, not anybody in the sophisticated argument. So when somebody ever says to you, we don't know what it is, we actually know what it is. Everybody knows what it is. Nobody argues what it is. What they argue is, does it matter? And that's where the arguments happen when you're on college campuses. Does it matter? Does human life have value by virtue of being a human being? Now, what did we start with? The Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence says what? We're all created equal and endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And here's the question. Do you have rights by virtue of what you are? Do you have a human right to be alive? Do the rights that you have come from, by nature, what you are as a human being, or do they come because of things that you can do? Because that's where the argument goes. They'll say, look, I got you. I agree with you. It's a human life. I'm not arguing that. I'm just arguing that there is such a thing as a human life that we're allowed to kill. There are certain kinds of human life that are lacking certain things that we should be able to kill. One of them is called consciousness. Consciousness means that you are aware of yourself, of your life, that you have interest. There are different arguments at what time consciousness comes about on a human being. All of those arguments are well after you're born. But right now on the college campus, more and more people are reading Peter Singer's book, Practical Ethics, and getting very excited about the idea that consciousness is the thing that gives you value. And so I'm standing in front of groups and I'm talking to somebody and they say, well, consciousness gives value. And I say, you are aware that consciousness doesn't come probably like 3 or 4 months after a baby is born, which means for the first 3 or 4 months you're saying that that baby is perfectly okay to kill. And more people are responding, yes. Peter Singer is a famous ethicist, and that is his whole argument. Because he wants to give rights to animals, he has to make the right-giving property consciousness, and by doing that, he knows he means that you can kill newborns without it being an immoral action. As a matter of fact, he says we ought to have a window after they're born to decide whether or not we want them, and if they have some illness that we don't want to deal with, we should be allowed to kill them. Because they're not morally valuable in the same way that the rest of us are. Now, for most people that aren't familiar with these kind of conversations in academic circles, they freak out when they hear it. This was a great example of this. Last February, 2 guys wrote an article called After-Birth Abortions. And they published it, and somebody found out about it and went public with it on Facebook. You know, in this day, you can't hide anything. And people freaked out. They said, what kind of thing is going on in these college campuses that these professors are talking about killing newborns? And they're talking about like it should be made law of the land, that we should be allowed to do that. And the response from these guys was, man, we've been talking about this for years. Why are y'all bothered by it now? This is something that we've been teaching in ethics classes for years at the university level. Your problem is you just didn't know that. You just don't understand the arguments we're offering, which is a weird apology, because basically what they're saying is, we're sorry y'all so stupid you don't understand what we're saying. A non-apology. But anytime you pick a place arbitrarily that says this is when life starts to become valuable, what does that mean to anybody that's on the other side of that line?
They're not valuable.
Okay. When slavery was just the thing to do in the United States, when it was just wildly out of control here in the South, in my home state of Georgia, and everywhere that you went down here for, how did they justify slavery?
Saying that they weren't as valuable.
They weren't like us, right? They drew a line. And actually, there's a Stephen Douglas and Abraham Lincoln have debates where he says, why is it okay? Why is it okay to do one thing to one person and not another? And the arguments were, well, because they're black. And Abraham Lincoln said, well, you better be careful, because if somebody comes along with lighter skin than you, by your argument, then that means that they should be allowed to enslave you. Because their skin's lighter, you're less valuable, and you can be their slave. Well, then it's, oh, well, we're smarter than they are. The next person that comes along that's smarter than you has the right to make you his slaves. So be careful where we start to draw these lines about who matters and who doesn't, because you will find yourself on the other side of them very quickly. So the question that I ask a guy when I'm standing in front of me on a college campus is, I say, after we've determined that life is what it is and that there's no argument about that, I said, do you think it would be wrong for me to kill you?
No.
You don't think it would be wrong for me to... You really don't? Cool.
Wait.
Do you think it would be wrong for me to kill you right now? Yes, okay. That's probably a better answer. I would be very careful in the street of missing that question. If the wrong guy asks you, you could find yourself in a bad situation. Okay. I know you spaced out. That was why I was pointing at you. Okay, so a guy looks at you and says, can I kill you? Your answer is no. Is it wrong? Your answer is yes. Okay. So here's the question then. What's the difference between you and I now and the embryo that we once were, that if we were to chop you up into little pieces, then it would be okay, and now it would not be? There's no difference? Oh, okay, well, there you go. Well, if the person that's going to try to defend the abortion as being right is going to use 3 or 4 differences, it's called the SLED acronym. SLED, SLED, size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. Those are the only 4 things they can argue. They're going to say one of those 4 things is the reason why, if I destroyed you then, at that point in your development, it would be okay, but if I killed you in that same way now, it would be wrong. Size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. Now, are you less valuable because you're smaller, morally? No, is size a value-giving property? Do you look at my 4-year-old daughter and say, she's a lot smaller than the rest of those people, it would probably be much less an offense to kill her than it would be her bigger brother, who seems to be much larger? No. And now there's such a thing called extrinsic value. Intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsic means it's by nature of what I am. Extrinsic means my value comes from outside. I'm a Falcons fan, a huge, diehard, lifelong Falcons fan, having grown up in Atlanta. Okay? Sam Baker is the left tackle of the Atlanta Falcons. He has what's called extrinsic value to the Atlanta Falcons. He's big. He's big in a way that I am not. The Falcons would never pay me to protect Matt Ryan, because they know 5 seconds after putting me on that line, Matt Ryan would be dead. Because that defensive end would just pick me up, throw me into the ground, and then run straight through Matt Ryan. I couldn't slow him down at all. I'm nowhere near big enough to do that. But because of his size, Sam Baker has extrinsic value. He's profitable. He's valuable to the Falcons. But that doesn't mean that it would be less of a moral offense to kill me than it would be to kill Sam Baker. Because morally, our value doesn't fluctuate with our size. We don't start off with very little value and get bigger, bigger, bigger. Value's growing as we grow larger, and then as you start to shrink when you get older, value's going down, 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 you're getting smaller. That's not the way value works. So size doesn't give us value. Level of development, we already talked about consciousness. And somebody comes up to me and they said, well, at a certain point of development, they don't have brains. So? All that means is that from the point that they come into existence to the time they develop brains, they don't need brains to be alive. You know who does need a brain to be alive? Everybody in this room. Not just me, everybody. All of us. We all need a brain to be alive because we're at a different level of development where it's necessary for us. The coordination of our body is run through our brains. For the first few days of your life, first few weeks of your life, it's not done that way. So you don't need a brain to survive. So level of development doesn't make us valuable. I am more intellectually developed than all of you. I am almost 45, which means I'm reaching my intellectual peak. As far as my development goes. After that, I go downhill. So if your parents are over 45, you can tell them you've started downhill. It's the other side of things. Sorry, I'm kind of sad, so I'm getting ready to see the smartest I'm ever going to be, and I'm just not thinking that's going to be that great a day. I was like, oh goodness gracious, it wasn't what I hoped it would be, and now it's just all downhill. But you are not there yet. You're intellectually growing and getting more developed. Am I more valuable than you because I'm intellectually more developed than you? No. Be proud of yourself. No. You are not less valuable for that. Environment is where you are. This is the argument right now, and it's written down in Supreme Court language. If I were to stick a scalpel into a woman and cut a child that is about to be born into pieces, and then take the child out piece by piece, which is what I have to do after crushing the skull so I can draw the baby out, that is perfectly morally legal and morally acceptable under the current law. If that baby were born, 5 seconds later, it would be murder. What changed about the substance of that being from being inside to outside that made it okay to tear them to pieces in the most violent way imaginable? Nobody could see it. That is a problem. And the other thing, nothing would actually be a better answer, right? Nothing changed. We can do surgery on children that are surgery on spina bifida children. We take them out of the womb, cut the woman's uterus open, and do surgery on their spine before they're born. Now, would that mean that we take them out of the womb, they're suddenly valuable for a moment, and then we put them back in? Now we can kill them again because we put them back in there and they're there. Where you are doesn't make any difference as far as how much value you have. And degree of dependence, this one is very scary because what they say is, well, it's dependent. It's completely dependent upon the mother. But if your value changes by virtue of your dependence, first of all, newborns are incredibly dependent, but who else gets dependent? Older people, right? The older you get, the more dependent you are. You can become medical dependent very early. I have friends of mine who are very, very young who are already taking medication for their heart. They're medically dependent. If they don't take it, they may die. Your medical dependence can start very early. Now, if that medical dependence is there, does that mean you're less valuable? And at what point does somebody get to decide that's the level of dependence that as soon as you cross that threshold, it's okay to kill you? It's no longer a moral offense to get rid of you. And guys, this is already going on in other countries. In the Netherlands, there's a thing called the Groningen Protocol. And these people are over there in the Netherlands, the doctors are deciding who gets to live and who gets to die so much that elderly people are terrified to go to the hospital because they're afraid they're going to go into the hospital and they're not going to come out. Because the doctor will sneak in and just say, well, this person is no longer living the quality of life that we should be looking after here in our society. And so they'll just slip them a little morphine overdose and they're gone. Seriously, there was a story just a year ago of a man who asked the doctor to promise, if I go to the hospital to get treated for this, I will come out alive. And the doctor said, I will treat you, I'll make sure everything's fine, don't worry about it. When that doctor went off duty, he came back, his patient was dead. Because the doctor that came on duty said, well, this person is not living the quality of life that is necessary to continue. The sooner you allow somebody to make up that determination, what level of dependence makes you valuable, you give them a lot of power. Because they're always going to put themselves on one side and other people on the other. So size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency, none of those things can make you valuable. Valuable such that it's okay to do then what we would call brutal murder now. So we're going to go out into the world and we're going to talk to those people and we're going to argue those things. We want to look to be able to argue using science and philosophy. Now, one thing I don't ever do is get into screaming and yelling matches. Greg Koch has great advice. He says, if anybody gets mad, I lose. Which means when I'm in a conversation with somebody, it's my job to monitor their emotions and my own. As I'm standing in front of somebody, it's my job to make sure that I don't lose control. And it's my job to make sure they don't lose control. What can you do to make sure that somebody you're talking to doesn't lose control? Now, let's say we're talking, you and I, right there. You and I are having a conversation, and I start getting very upset and very angry in that conversation. What can you do to diffuse that? Can you think of anything? Okay, and what can you say? You're saying that human life matters, and I'm like, and human life has value by virtue of what it is, and I'm starting to get angry with you because I know somebody had an abortion and I like them, and what you're telling me is that you think that they killed somebody. What can you do as I'm starting to get angry? This is really easy. I know. Okay, that's why. Look, if you raise your hands up and tell somebody, you're getting very excited, and I really want to have this opportunity to talk to you, but I don't think that we should continue this right now. And maybe we just need to take a step back and take a break. 9 times out of 10, they register what they're doing. They see that they've lost it, and they say, okay, I'll calm down. Or, the worst thing that happens there is you get out of that conversation. Say, let's move on. You monitor your emotions in conversations. You monitor their emotions in everything, and not just talking about abortion, and anytime you're talking about Christianity with somebody, because our goal is to represent Christ in those conversations, to be ambassadors for Christ. And when I was an atheist, I can tell you I had 2 goals when I was talking to Christians. As an atheist, if I could get either one of these things when I entered into a conversation, I was fine. Number 1 was to make you look stupid. I wanted you to doubt your faith. I wanted you to walk away from the conversation feeling like I was superior to you, I was smarter than you, and that you didn't know what you were talking about. That was my first goal. My second goal, and I was fine with either one of these, was to make you act like a cussing, screaming maniac. Because when Christians do it, you're hypocrites. When I did it, I was just being what I was. So to find you who believes you're better than me, your morals are better than me, you're coming from the higher ground, and I'm this lowly atheist, and you're bringing it to me, if I were able to make you a screaming nutcase, I was like, great, I win! And I can do that to almost every Christian still to this day. I do it to youth groups all the time. We do a role play with atheists, and I'll tell them beforehand, on this particular episode, or this particular exercise, this is my goal. And usually within moments, even within minutes of the dialogue, some kid in the group will just yell out, that's fine, man, why don't you just go to hell and burn if that's how you feel about it? I'm like, I win.
I am the master.
Just that easy. How you argue matters in everything that you talk about, but most especially when you're talking about whether or not human life is valuable. If you're going to stand in front of somebody and tell them that we ought to be better than what we're doing, then you ought to be better than how they're behaving when they get ugly. People think abortion is intractable, which means that there's nothing that we can do about it and there's no way that we can get out of it. If you read Eric Metaxas' book on William Wilberforce, he starts off by saying, William Wilberforce was born into a world where slavery was normal, was the understood way that society existed, and that nobody would have ever believed that you could have had a society without slavery because it was so necessary for how they lived. It made it possible for them to have the lifestyle they have. Those are the exact same arguments we hear today on abortion. And I'm telling you that Eric Metaxas then says William Wilberforce died in a world where they already recognized that slavery was a moral evil and that it had to go. That's how much one man was able to accomplish in his lifetime. He was born into a world that would never have imagined there was anything wrong with it. He died from a world that recognized it was evil and was willing to do what it had to do to try to extract it from their society. Just because our system is built on this right or this freedom or these things that they believe that they've given themselves doesn't mean that with good arguments from good arguers we can't change things. What's necessary is for us to realize that if they are human beings in the same way that you and I are, then 1.2 million innocent human beings are being killed every year legally in the United States. And then we're told women can't be equal unless they have the right to do this. And this is not true. Not just not true as far as the sense it's a bad thing, but it's in violation of everything that we learn as Christians as to where our value comes from, how we're supposed to deal with adversity, how we're supposed to behave. And as far as I'm concerned, it's an insult to women to say that you can't be equal to men unless you have a surgical procedure. It's not true in any way scientifically, it's not true philosophically, and it's not true spiritually. And there's a cost. Because once you tell one group of people they're not human and you give yourself the resources to exploit them, it makes you more callous. Scripture tells us you will grow insensitive to the truth. You will look at other people and use them for other ways. You will not be what you ought to be. And look at our culture. Look at the world that we live in. Does it look like a culture that's getting more and more sensitive to the value of human life? Or do we see every day it just degrading and getting worse and worse and worse? But it begins as easy as somebody just asked me earlier today, what do we do? Start talking to people. Start learning and equipping yourself to be able to have these conversations. You are the people that must do it. The next generation cannot grow up and just say, we're going to let things keep going the way that they are. But you have to see it as important and be willing to put yourself out in an effort to do it. I thank you for your time.